So I got a lot of good questions in the chat, and we will attempt to tackle them as best we can. So a lot of the questions that came through, we'll start with some of the most basic, which is, how do I describe Unitarian Universalism in 30 seconds? What's my elevator pitch for those of you who are new? And again, this changes. This changes for me, and it will change for you. When I was a kid growing up as a UU, I said, it's a religion that's more about, it's more concerned with how to be a good person than it is with really anything else, and how to be a good person to people in community. That's literally what I said for most of my childhood and my adolescence. As I've gotten older and the demands of my answer have grown as a professional, I've bulked it out a little bit. But what I usually talk about is Unitarian Universalism is a historically Christian faith, but we no longer identify as solely Christian. We're religiously liberal in the sense that we welcome lots of different ideas, lots of different truths, lots of different wisdoms from around the world and from other traditions and other faiths. And we believe that the individual has access to it all. You don't need an intermediary to experience the divine. We are atheists and agnostics, but we are also firm believers in something greater than ourselves, in the power of community, the power of love, and that what we do with our lives matters, just as Lisa said in her opening remarks. What we do with our lives matters as Unitarian Universalists. How we spend our days on this planet, however long that is, however short that is, but it matters. And so we engage with Unitarian Universalism to help inform how we spend our days, how we spend our lives, the choices that we make with our time, with our money, with our talents. That's how I describe Unitarian Universalism. The other question I got was around, is this a faith? And this is one that I see a lot. Is this, and maybe sometimes I think people are conflating faith with religion. I certainly do that. And I will give you, I mean, if any of you know me at all, you'll know that this is a little bit of a not a raw nerve, but this is definitely like one of the things that really gets my goat. And sometimes that's for people who have been raised UU, but yes, this is a faith. I'm not sure what you think you're doing on Sundays when you come and you light candles and you sing and we talk about how to be a good person in the world and how to treat one another. That's faith to me. That's religion to me. Sometimes I think those questions about, is this a faith or is this a religion, is a lot more about a projection of what you expect religion or faith to be based on previous experiences. And so this doesn't jive with that. This is like fitting a square in a round hole. And so you go, this can't be a religion, this can't be a faith, because it doesn't look or feel like the religion or the faith I came from. But as your minister, it is. It is. What we do here is religious. We believe in things greater than ourselves as Unitarian Universalists. Our first principle is about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That is a belief in something greater than our own selfish needs. We believe in an interdependent web of all existence. That is something greater than just our own independent selfish needs. We owe each other things. That is a big part of Unitarian Universalism. We owe each other something. And we're in this mess figuring out what it is we owe each other and how best to express that. But we have an obligation to one another. So yes, this is a religion. This is a faith. And sometimes what that brings up for folks is like, well, I don't have faith in something like a God. And that's okay. You don't need to have faith in something that's like a God, but do you have faith in something greater than yourself? Do you have faith that that the cosmos is a miracle? Do you have faith that the stars that shine are a miracle, even if they have a very scientific answer? Do you have faith that the sun rises and the sun sets each day? I think we all have faith in something. One of my earlier sermons this year talked a lot about from James Luther Adams, who's one of the greatest Unitarian theologians of the 20th century. But one of the things he talks about is, ask a man what he professes to be his religion. Can you all hear the church bells ringing in the background? He says, ask a man what his religion is, and he will tell you something about the Bible. He will tell you something about God. And I always think about this, but then he goes on to say, ask him what is most important to him, and he will say something else. And that is what his faith is. And he might say it's his job, or it's his family, or it's making money. And so we ask ourselves, how does what is important to us and religion overlap? And that is where I think Unitarian Universalism, where the rubber meets the road. Okay. So yes, faith. This is a faith. This is a religion. Okay, I'm looking at some of the other ones. Let me see here. There was a good one about, someone asked about conflict in the congregation. What is the nature of conflict, in how do we get better at conflict? How do I distinguish between healthy conflict and toxic conflict? So I think, for one, we're a covenantal faith. So covenant, which is the idea that we have agreements that are explicitly stated about how we treat each other, how we are expected to be with one another. That is the basis for how we gather. We don't have a profession of faith. We don't have strict dogma or rules. A lot of it is created cooperatively in covenant. We bring together ideas about how it is that we should treat one another, how it is we should be with one another, and that is covenant, and it is sacred. And so when someone violates covenant and they act in a way that is not true to the ideals or the aspiration we have set forth in a document, that creates conflict. And conflict is largely about hurt feelings and a mismatch of expectations. So how do we deal when someone has hurt our feelings? How do we feel when someone has diminished us or made us feel small? How do we deal when someone has ignored what is important to us, or I would say taken away our right to self-determination? Sometimes we exert control over others in ways that isn't healthy. So something about Unitarian Universalism that I have grown to understand as I have tried it, which is that what happens when you name that to someone, when instead of ignoring it or shoving it under the rug or letting time heal the wound, when you share in a moment of vulnerability with someone that they have hurt you, and there is conflict that exists between us, you open the possibility for a deeper relationship. You open the possibility for healing, for knowing one another better, for an apology that perhaps you are owed. And so I think one of the things about Unitarian Universalism and covenant is that conflict is important. Conflict is about being honest with one another. It's about being real with one another and expressing ourselves truly about what's happening below the surface. And on the other side, covenant is about receiving that information, hearing the wrongs that you have done, and examining in yourself, getting curious with yourself. Did I do that with intention to hurt? Have I done that with the intention to control someone? And if I didn't do those things intentionally, then I need to name that. I need to say, I'm sorry. I didn't intend for that to be what happened. But obviously it has happened. And an apology can bring forth a deeper sense of knowing. As a minister, this is critical as a minister. Reaching out to you when I feel like maybe I have said or done something that has hurt you, when I hear that you are displeased with something that's happening in the congregation, I cannot look away from that. I cannot ignore that. I have to reach out and extend an opportunity to talk about it, to deepen the relationship. And I invite all of you to do that. I think that is an essential part of Unitarian Universalism, is how we engage in conflict with one another. So one of the ways that I determine healthy conflict from toxic conflict, sometimes you just know. Sometimes you just get a feeling. Sometimes you just get a feeling. It's like, for me, toxic conflict is often when the parties involved aren't really invested in the solution. They're more invested in the conflict itself. They're more invested in living in the pain of it than finding a way through it. That feels toxic to me. I think also what can feel toxic is when there's a lot of ego involved and people aren't able to take that step back and to get curious about what has happened here, what has unfolded here, that someone has, either they get curious about, why does that hurt so much when someone says that to me? Or they get curious about, how is it that I hurt someone when I never intended to? So getting curious, there's a lack of curiosity, a lack of interest and reflection about what's at play. I think that's also an indication of a toxic conflict. But in general, engaging in conflict is a muscle that you can grow and you can get better at, and you can overcome a fear of conflict. And I think in general, we tend to be pretty conflict averse people. And I don't always think it serves us to be conflict averse. I think it sometimes does a disservice to our covenant about how we'll be with one another, because it creates an element of superficiality, which is like, I'm okay even when I'm not, and I like you all even when some of you have really hurt me. So I think that there's a demand sometimes for honesty that comes with conflict. Another question I got, I remember, I got a question about the politicization of religion, and sort of let me just check the wording of it when I check here. Yeah, that our faith, our denomination, is seems to be getting more political than religious and spiritual in terms of social action and ideology. I think this is a really interesting question. For one, I don't see Unitarianism or Universalism as ever having been apolitical. We are faiths that from the beginning have had political implications, whether it was a rejection of the Church of England as being divinely connected, or whether it was a rejection of Christ as the Son of God, which went against the Holy Roman Empire, both of which are political entities. Whether it was a rejection of the idea that people who were kidnapped from Africa and brought here were whole people that deserved to live full lives free from slavery. I don't think our history is apolitical. So it's always curious to me when people observe a sense that we have somehow gotten more political. What I think we have seen generally and generationally is a rejection of the idea that you could be religious, that you could be a person of faith and not have political opinions, right? This idea, as Audre Lorde says, the personal is the political. And what we do with our lives is we are forced to engage with politics. Our faith demands us to be engaged with the questions of the day, primarily around justice. And for a great many of us, the questions of justice demand political answers because a lot of them are created via the problems of injustice are created via political vehicles, right? So one of the things we talk about is that poverty is a political institution. We make choices. Our politicians make choices about how people stay in poverty or how to lift them out of poverty. The problems of incarceration, surveillance, and policing, those are political. Our politicians have made choices to create those systems, to fund those systems. So yeah, our faith demands that we be politically engaged, because if we're talking about justice, the mission of this church is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world. It's gonna get political. And we've seen, I think we've seen in the Catholic Church in particular, what happens when people, in the 60s and the 70s, the Catholic Church became politicized in a way with liberation theology that it had never been before. And we see people leaving faiths that feel like what happens in the synagogue, what happens in the church, what happens in the temple is separate from what happens in my life. And that people leave those faiths because you need that integration for it to feel authentic and genuine. That's how I experience it. So that you need that integration of the personal and the political to make your faith feel like it's lived and that it exists beyond Sunday, and that it's not just something that happens in the four walls of our building. So that's something I think about with the political. When people have questions about, like, we're a very political faith. We have always been a political faith. And we will always continue to be a political faith, because I think it is in the best interest of us staying relevant and staying real in people's lives, is if we talk about politics and we talk about the things that affect justice in this country and the world. So that's sort of my answer. That is my answer about that question. I have time for probably one more question that I will tackle. So another question that comes up a lot with Unitarian Universalism is about this first principle. How do I uphold the inherent worth and dignity of other people when perhaps they don't uphold my worth and dignity? How do I hold boundaries when I'm respecting someone else's inherent worth and dignity? And I will, this has never been more alive, I think, for folks than in the post-Trump era, than in the Trump era. I think that it has been, that is probably the biggest question I get most consistently from people coming into the faith. Okay, I want to believe this first principle. I really, really want to believe this. And yet it is hard. So yeah, I don't think there is an easy, tidy answer. I think there are a few different ways to approach an answer to this question. The first one comes to me from my colleagues who talk about this a lot, which is like this notion that we actually don't have to be that concerned with making sure that people who that somehow we don't have to take on the responsibility of teaching other people that they are hateful and bigoted. That sometimes what Unitarian Universalism allows us to do is just love people and leave it up to the Creator, or leave it up to what happens after we die. And it's not our job. It's not our job to judge. It's not our job to take on them as the project that we will solve. That's not to say it's a abdication of responsibility to engage or to be aware, but that it frees us from the burden of fixing, because that fixing is out of our control and it belongs to something that happens later. Sometimes I like that tact, sometimes I don't, but that I'll offer that to you as something I have heard from colleagues. I think the other thing about, how do we have boundaries around the first principle, is that loving someone and honoring their worth is not an exercise in self-negation. It's an exercise in a dynamic that plays both ways. I don't think you need to love someone and honor their dignity to the extent that it diminishes you. I don't think that serves anybody. That also sort of comes with this idea that love and dignity are finite resources, that by somehow giving somebody else love and dignity, I might come away with less. And the other thing that always comes to me is James Baldwin, Forever and Always, that love is a fight. Love does not look one way. Love is sometimes loving yourself. Love is sometimes sticking up for somebody else. Love is sometimes fighting. It's not just passive and gentle and meek and mild. Love is sometimes aggressive and in your face and about demanding. Love can be lots of things. So those are some of the things I think about when I think about the how to think through that really thorny first principle, which I'll give to you is difficult. It is a difficult principle. So you are not alone in trying to figure out how to live it. It's a hard one, but it's one that is incredibly important. Incredibly important. And so as I look at the time, those are the questions we got to today. I'm grateful I tried to condense as many questions into one or two as I could. So I'm really grateful for those of you who shared your questions in the chat and were willing to listen to me ramble for the day.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.